Tonight, you will be visited by one sponsored ad, courtesy of Atlas VPN. It can be scary online. As the internet continues to grow and evolve over the years, so do the people that use it. There are lots of folks out there that want your information, and they have ways of getting it. With Atlas VPN, you can browse with peace of mind. Atlas VPN keeps your search information safe, so you don't have to worry about any shady outside business. And it's not just your private info that's being protected. Atlas also blocks malicious links, ads, and trackers. And if someone still does try to steal your information, Atlas notifies you. You can't put a price on comfort. Well, I guess you could, but it's not a very high price at all in this case. As you can tell by my annual output of Christmas-themed videos, the holiday season is well upon us. And with the holiday season comes holiday sales. Atlas VPN Premium is being offered for just $1.70 per month, with 6 months free and a 30-day money-back guarantee. Click the link in my video description below to take advantage of this great deal. Even the stingiest man in town, who we'll be talking about very shortly, would see that this is a good deal. Again, click the link in my description to take full advantage of the low price. Atlas VPN Premium is just a click away. Since the 1960s, one of the major staples of Christmas specials has been Rankin Bass. Rudolph, Frosty, and all their friends have graced the TV screens of our childhood, along with oddball obscurities like Pinocchio's Christmas or Leprechaun's Christmas Gold. It makes sense that they would have their own version of A Christmas Carol, titled The Stingiest Man in Town. What some people don't know is that this special is a remake of a live-action special from about 20 years prior. So, in this 2-for-1 entry, we're looking at both versions of The Stingiest Man in Town, starting with the original one from 1956. The Stingiest Man in Town originally aired as part of the Alcoa Hour anthology series. The show consisted largely of dramatic plays and occasionally musicals, all aired live. For years, this particular special was thought to be lost, but a copy was discovered in 2011. The original airing was in color, but the fact we have this full black and white version at all is very nice. Given the incredibly large number of Christmas Carol adaptations, it should stand to reason that quite a few are musicals. From what I found, Stingiest Man is actually the second musical version of the story. The first one was also a TV production that aired in 1954. In fact, they both share a well-known actor, Basil Rathbone. Rathbone played Jacob Marley, a non-singing role in the first version, but here he gets to act and sing as Ebenezer Scrooge. In addition to these, he also played Scrooge in the Tales from Dickens anthology and in a radio play. Although Ebenezer is not as synonymous with Rathbone as Sherlock Holmes, the actor was no stranger to the old skinflint. He does an alright job as Scrooge. I wouldn't rank him as the best version of the character, but he works well as both the crotchety old miser and the reborn soul we see at the end. He doesn't seem to be entirely comfortable with the songs, though. He's great in his first number where he's in full miser mode. The way he angrily spits out his lines at his nephew is done with such vigor that it makes up for the less than stellar singing.
What's so merry on Christmas Day? The merry money you throw away, the merry bills you have to pay. When you say Merry Christmas, I say bam.
His other two songs, both more on the emotional side, are a little awkward. Now, you don't have to be the greatest singer in the world to sell a song, especially in musical theater. A lot of it is really dependent on the acting and emotion behind the words. But Rathbone wavers between singing and speaking the songs, leaning more into speaking, and it just doesn't really work. Luckily, he's remembered for much more than a few not-so-great vocal performances. Also, this is more of a nitpick, but it became really distracting when I noticed it. Throughout the whole show, Rathbone is doing this weird puckering, quivering thing with his lips. It seems like he wanted to give Scrooge a tick or something, but it never stops. Given that this is a musical, the next subject should be the songs. The music was by Fred Spielman, and the book and lyrics were by Janice Torr. Their biggest hit seems to be the song Paper Roses, which they wrote together in 1960. The songs are so-so. There aren't really any bad ones, but there aren't many that stick out to me as being truly good. Several of them have gotten stuck in my head while I was working on this video, but that often happens to me. Just a few months ago, when I did my video on Edgar, I had the title song from the Aristocats internally playing on loop. It's like a type of musical Stockholm Syndrome. The songs I like the most were sung by the Four Lads, a quartet who acts as narrators for the story. Their narration song, A Christmas Carol, is very nice, and the title song is a lot of fun. Granted, the song about how mean and nasty Scrooge is was done better twice in the Albert Finney and Muppet versions, but it's still enjoyable. The biggest problem with the songs was the pacing in the Christmas present section. After a lively song about the Christmas spirit, we are treated to 3 ballads in a row. Again, none of them are bad, but it really slows things down. 2 of them, Yes, There Is a Santa Claus and The Birthday Party of the King, feel like they were written with the pop market chiefly in mind. Neither of them rely on the story's context, and could potentially play on the radio around the Christmas season without any issues. I think a lot of musicals have a song or 2 written with that intention, it just seems more transparent here than other times. This is also evident in one of the first songs, An Old-Fashioned Christmas. It seems like they were really banking on this one being a hit. It gets a full performance a few minutes into the show, plays as an instrumental in Fezziwig's party, gets reprised by Fred at his party, and then gets sung by the whole cast over the end credits. Another musical piece of note comes near the end. When Scrooge sees his own grave, we're treated to a 3-minute dance number. Devils prance around the graveyard, menacing Scrooge with chains, all set to a piano-led piece called Concerto Inferno. It's pretty fun, and it's certainly distinct. I'm very curious to see how this one would have looked in color. Most adaptations take some creative liberties with story details, and this one is no stranger. For one thing, Scrooge actually lives in his counting house. He's even seen eating his dinner when Cratchit leaves for the night. I imagine this was mostly done for economic reasons. One less set to deal with in the production. It does, perhaps unintentionally, add another aspect to Scrooge's coldness. Now that he lives in his place of work, he has even less of a reason to ever leave, shutting himself off even more efficiently from the world. Symbolically, it works well, but it does raise the question of why everyone seems to know who he is if he's never skulking about outside. Some productions have shown Mrs. Dilber appearing before and after Scrooge's miraculous night, and this one does the same. It also has Old Joe present in these scenes, here known as Harry Hawkins. When Scrooge is visiting Cratchit's house with Christmas Present, he gets to see the ups and downs of being invisible. They have some fun with the material, and I'm surprised more adaptations haven't tried something similar. One of the most interesting deviations is in the Christmas Past sequence. After seeing Scrooge and Belle together, we're whisked to a fantasy set. Scrooge and Belle sing golden dreams about their aspirations for the future. This leads to something of a dream ballet, where gold bricks are stacked between the lovers. It's not exactly subtle, but neither was the original book. The reason this feels like a deviation isn't really because of the plot or writing. It follows the main story fine, but stylistically, it feels like we're in a completely different production for 10 minutes. But that's not really bad, it certainly changes things up. Meanwhile, Scrooge and Belle come off as very melodramatic, definitely more stage acting than screen acting.
When poverty comes through the door, love flies out the window.
Sweetheart, please don't say that. You frighten me.
As far as I can tell, this whole production was filmed live. This leads to a few small bloopers, mostly flubbed lines and a boom mic visible during the Christmas Past fantasy, but everyone handles themselves pretty well. I'm impressed Rathbone was able to get around so quickly during certain transitions. The spirits really can do anything they like. One more quick note. During the opening song, Fred passes an organ grinder with a real live monkey on set. This is the only Christmas carol I can think of with a monkey in it. Even the Muppets, with all their penguins, monsters, and lobsters, didn't have a monkey. It's not hard to compare this to different Christmas carols. I don't know how many people saw this when it aired, and given that it was considered lost for many years, I don't know how many people saw it afterwards, but there are definitely some parts that remind me of future versions. The 1970 musical starring Albert Finney kept coming to mind, for example. Basil Rathbone's acting as a particularly crotchety Scrooge was close to Finney's portrayal. The devils wrapping him in chains in the graveyard is another similarity. Both versions also have Scrooge coming to the Cratchit's house and being compared to Santa Claus. Finney takes things up a notch by even dressing as Father Christmas, but the sentiment is still there. Meanwhile, the scene where the wandering spirits invade Scrooge's bedroom reminded me of the TV musical with Kelsey Grammer. I wonder if perhaps Arthur Rankin or Jules Bass saw this when it first aired. I'm really not sure why else they would have selected Stingiest to get an animated remake, but either way, that brings us to 1978. Rankin Bass specials often got 1 or 2 celebrities to provide a voice, and these come in the form of Walter Matthau and Tom Bosley. We'll talk about Matthau first, voicing Ebenezer Scrooge. Walter Matthau is normally a very good actor. However, his performance in this shows why this special is his only voice acting credit. Great acting on stage and screen does not always equal great voice acting. It requires a different approach. You have to make the character believable using only your voice, and most of the time, it's very apparent that Matthau is just reading his lines from a script. It's especially noticeable in dramatic moments where Scrooge expresses any kind of remorse.
Recall how you drove love from your heart and replaced it with the worship of money? No!
As far as singing goes, Mathau is slightly better than Rathbone. Neither of these men are fantastic singers, but Mathau has an easier time carrying a tune. That being said, Rathbone sells the songs better. I believe in him as Scrooge, unlike Mathau. Although the title is The Stingiest Man in Town, I'd say that this Scrooge is actually the craftiest version we've seen. He plays on Bob's good nature, fretting with crocodile tears about having to pay Mr. Cratchit for Christmas. Bob agrees to have the day off with no pay, something I don't think I've seen any other Cratchit do. Tom Bosley, on the other hand, fares much better in his role. He plays a Jiminy Cricket-like character unique to this version, literally named Bah Humbug. He serves as our narrator, although they drop this idea a third into the story. Once Marley departs, the humbug just follows Scrooge along on his journey. The Muppet Christmas Carol would handle this idea better by essentially splitting the character in half. Gonzo is the full-time narrator, while Rizzo acts as the audience surrogate. Once Humbug stops telling the story, he's largely superfluous. However, Bosley gives such a warm performance that he never overstays his welcome. It doesn't hurt that he looks like a bug version of the Rankin Bass Bilbo from the prior year. Speaking of how the characters look, this one has Paul Coker's fingerprints all over it. Paul Coker Jr. was the production designer for many of the Rankin Bass specials, including Frosty the Snowman, The Year Without a Santa Claus, and 'Twas the Night Before Christmas. Coker had a very distinct way of drawing characters, which often works, except when it doesn't. Most of the characters look fine, but then you have Tiny Tim, who looks like a glassy-eyed Keebler elf. The special takes full advantage of being animated, rather than a live performance on sound stages. Scrooge gets whisked around to all his usual places, and gets to prowl the streets of London on his way to his house, as opposed to living in his office. Almost none of the live-action script is retained, but surprisingly, they keep all the songs. I say surprisingly, since the live-action version runs a full half-hour longer than the cartoon. Somehow they managed to cram every single song in, barring a few short reprises. This is impressive in theory, but it ends up bogging things down. Several songs are shortened, of course. An Old-Fashioned Christmas, for example, was a grand production number in live action, but runs under a minute here. So many different tunes are thrown at the audience, with very little time in between to process anything. I talked about this in my Raggedy Ann video, since that movie had the same problem, no matter how good the songs were. Even die-hard musical theater fans might feel a little overwhelmed by this one. The worst case of pacing arrives during the Christmas Future sequence. The entire section is only a minute and a half long, I kid you not. True, the part about Tiny Tim's death was covered in the Christmas present scene, but it still feels surprisingly rushed. We do get a bit of fun, creepy imagery, like Scrooge's tombstone briefly turning into the devil. Perhaps, though, Rankin Bass just didn't want to get too dark for their annual Christmas special. Another issue is the way the songs are performed. They're lacking the energy and enthusiasm live-action versions had. Rankin Bass is usually pretty good when it comes to their musical numbers, but these ones ring a bit hollow compared to the originals. Here's what I mean.
How can anybody be so stingy, so stingy, so stingy? How can anybody be so stingy? He's the stingiest man in town.
How can anybody be so stingy, so stingy, so stingy? How can anybody be so stingy? He's the stingiest man in town.
I've laid out a lot of the flaws in the special, so now I'll talk about a few things I think they improved. The song about Tim's potential future, One Little Boy, actually works better in this version. It discusses how a single child may be seen as a speck in the grand scheme of things, but how one's point of view could change if they actually knew the child in question. In the live-action special, Christmas Present sings the entire thing himself. In this one, Scrooge gets to argue the case why Tim should live, showing some growth in his character. This is one of the strongest songs in either musical, and it makes a good point about human nature. When you actually meet someone, it's harder to write them off as a mere statistic. The Christmas Spirit song works better here as well. The 50s production had a bunch of adults dressed as toys and prancing around Scrooge's room, teetering between corny charm and uncanny valley creepiness. The whole thing works a lot better in animation, with much cuter toys and more opportunity for actual whimsy. For those of you watching this video when it first comes out, there's an elephant in the room that I have to address as I end this one. On October 25th, 2022, Jules Bass passed away. He was, of course, the Bass in Rankin Bass. Arthur Rankin Jr. died back in 2014. I had actually been planning to do this video as far back as last year, and had the script for it mostly completed in September. It's a strange coincidence, but it does allow me to say that both men will be missed. Rankin Bass has made dozens upon dozens of Christmas specials, although really only about 5 of them still get regular airtime around the holiday season. The Stingiest Man in town just kinda gets lost in the crowd, along with so many others. I wouldn't put either version on my top 10 list, but they each have their merits. The 50s one is certainly ambitious for its time, and the animated one has the virtue of being a Rankin Bass special. Even their more mediocre productions have a cozy charm. Both make for a fun curiosity. No matter what, though, stingy as he is, Scrooge will never compare with Snow Miser or Heat Miser. They will always be my go-to misers when it comes to Rankin Bass.